I arrived at the port just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky bruised purple and gold over the endless white of the Arctic. The wind cut through my jacket, sharper than I'd expected, and the air tasted of salt and old diesel. The cargo ship loomed at the dock, its hull streaked with rust, the name Aurora's Mercy barely legible beneath layers of ice. Men moved along the deck, their faces hidden by scarves and hoods, voices low and clipped. No one met my eyes as I climbed the gangway, duffel bag heavy on my shoulder. I'd worked ships before, but never felt so unwelcome. The crew's glances were quick, wary, as if I carried something contagious. The captain stood at the top of the gangway, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat immaculate despite the grime around him. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and his handshake was brief, businesslike. "You're the new hand," he said, voice flat as the sea. "We leave at midnight. Don't wander." He turned away before I could answer, already barking orders at the crew. I watched as they loaded the last of the crates, moving with a nervous urgency that didn't match the slow, methodical pace of most dock work. Then, as a winch lifted a heavy crate toward the hold, the cable snapped with a sharp, metallic crack. The crate crashed to the deck, splitting open. Something spilled out, bundles wrapped in oilcloth, marked with strange, looping symbols I didn't recognize. The crew froze. One man crossed himself, another spat over the rail. The captain's face tightened. "Get that cleaned up," he snapped, and the men scrambled to obey, avoiding the symbols as if they might burn. I stood there, heart pounding, feeling the cold settle deeper into my bones. No one explained the markings, and no one spoke to me as the crate was hurriedly repacked and lowered into the hold. I realized then that I was an outsider here, not just to the crew, but to whatever unspoken rules governed this ship. As the last light faded and the engines rumbled to life, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stepped into something old and dangerous, and that the real journey hadn't even begun. The ship's horn sounded, a mournful wail that echoed across the frozen harbor. The last mooring line was cast off, and the Aurora's Mercy slid away from the dock, engines thrumming beneath my feet. I watched the lights of the port recede into the darkness, swallowed by the Arctic night. The crew moved with silent efficiency, securing hatches and checking lines, but their eyes kept darting to the captain, as if waiting for some unspoken signal. An hour into the voyage, the captain summoned us to the mess hall. The room was cramped, the air thick with the smell of coffee and old sweat. The crew gathered around the long table, faces drawn and serious. I took a seat at the end, trying to look like I belonged. The captain stood at the head of the table, his presence filling the room. He waited until everyone was silent, then placed a battered leather notebook on the table. "These are the rules," he said, voice low but carrying. "You will follow them. No exceptions. No questions." He opened the notebook and began to read, his eyes never leaving our faces. 1. Never go on deck alone after midnight. If you must, take another crewman with you. If you find yourself alone, return inside immediately. 2. If you hear voices calling from the ice, do not answer. Do not look for the source. Do not acknowledge them in any way. 3. If you see lights on the horizon that move against the wind, report to the bridge. Do not approach. 4. Never look directly at the northern lights. If you must go outside when they appear, keep your eyes down and move quickly. 5. If you find a door or hatch open that you know was closed, do not close it. Report it to me or the first mate. 6. If you see anyone on board who should not be here, someone you don't recognize, or a crewman acting strangely, do not confront them. Find me immediately. 7. At dawn and dusk, stay away from the bow. Remain amidships or aft until the sun is fully up or down. He paused, letting the words settle. The crew listened with grim attention, some nodding along, others staring at the table. I glanced around, expecting someone to laugh or roll their eyes, but no one did. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. These rules are not for your comfort, the captain continued. They are for your survival. Every man who's sailed these waters knows what happens when the rules are broken. His gaze swept the room, lingering on each of us. We've lost good men to carelessness. We will not lose more. A silence followed, broken only by the hum of the engines. I wanted to ask what he meant, to demand an explanation for the bizarre list, but the look on the captain's face stopped me. The crew's expressions were enough: fear, resignation, a kind of haunted acceptance. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. The captain closed the notebook and tucked it under his arm. Memorize them. Live by them. If you can't, you'll wish you had. With that, he left the room, and the crew slowly dispersed, some muttering prayers, others exchanging uneasy glances. I sat there, the rules echoing in my mind, wondering what kind of voyage I'd signed up for and what price was paid by those who didn't listen. The first days at sea blurred together, marked by the endless gray of sky and water and the constant, low groan of the ship's hull as it pushed through the ice. The cold was a living thing, seeping into my bones no matter how many layers I wore. Frost crept along the portholes, and every breath hung in the air like a ghost. The world outside was a frozen wasteland, jagged floes grinding against each other, the horizon lost in a haze of snow and mist. There was no land, no birds, nothing but the ship and the ice, and the knowledge that we were utterly alone. I learned the rhythms of Aurora's mercy quickly. The crew worked in shifts, maintaining the engines, checking the cargo, and keeping the decks clear of snow. Meals were brief, eaten in silence or with low, nervous conversation. I found myself drawn to a few of the men: Yuri, the gruff Russian engineer with a dry sense of humor, and Malik, a quiet cook who always seemed to know when someone needed a hot drink or a word of comfort. They didn't talk much about the rules, but I noticed how carefully they followed them. No one went on deck alone after dark. If a hatch was found open, it was left that way until the captain inspected it. At dawn and dusk, the bow was deserted, even when the view was breathtaking. It didn't take long for the strangeness to begin. The first night, as I lay in my bunk, I heard a faint tapping on the hull, like fingers drumming just below the waterline. I told myself it was the ice shifting, but the sound was too regular, too deliberate. Another time, I caught a glimpse of lights moving across the ice, far from any ship or settlement. They flickered in unnatural patterns, green and blue and white, and vanished when I tried to focus on them. Malik saw me watching once and shook his head, warning me away from the porthole. There were other moments, a shadow passing behind me on an empty deck, a voice almost lost in the wind that sounded like my own name. Yuri joked about the ice spirits, but his eyes were wary, and he always made sure someone else was nearby after midnight. The rules became a kind of mantra, repeated in whispers and posted on the mess hall wall. I found myself checking the list before every shift, memorizing each line, afraid I'd forget something crucial. The isolation pressed in, heavier with each passing day. The radio picked up only static, and the world beyond the ship felt impossibly distant. I started to understand why the crew was so tense, why the captain's rules were treated like gospel. There was something out there in the ice, something that watched and waited, just beyond the reach of our lights. Every time I stepped outside, I felt its presence, cold and patient, as if the Arctic itself was alive and hungry. I began to wonder if the rules were enough, or if we were simply delaying the inevitable. It happened on the fifth night, when the wind was howling so hard the ship seemed to shudder with every gust. I was in the mess hall, nursing a mug of coffee and trying to ignore the way the walls creaked and groaned. Most of the crew had already turned in, but I could hear footsteps above, someone moving on the deck. Malik was at the stove, humming quietly to himself, and Yuri sat across from me, fiddling with a battered deck of cards. The atmosphere was tense, the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting to be broken. Then the door burst open, and Anders, the youngest deckhand, stumbled in, face pale and eyes wide. He was breathing hard, his jacket half-zipped, and his hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table. "He's gone," Anders gasped. I told him not to, but he said it was just for a minute. He went out alone. Yuri's face went slack. "Who?" "Jonas. He forgot his gloves on the aft deck. Said he'd be right back. I waited, but he didn't come. I called for him, but..." Anders' voice broke, and he looked at the floor. Malik set down his spoon, all the color draining from his face. "What time?" Anders swallowed. "Just after midnight." No one moved for a moment. Then Yuri stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We have to tell the captain." The captain arrived within minutes, his expression carved from stone. He listened to Anders' halting explanation, then turned to me and Yuri. "Stay here. No one else leaves this room." He took Malik and two others and disappeared down the corridor, leaving us in a silence so thick it felt suffocating. We waited, the minutes stretching into an hour. I tried to distract myself by counting the rivets in the table, but my mind kept circling back to Jonas, his easy laugh, the way he always whistled while working, the fact that he'd seemed so alive just hours before. I thought about the rules, about how easy it was to forget, to think you could bend them just once. When the captain returned, his face was grimmer than ever. He ordered everyone to the mess hall. We gathered, the room crowded and tense, and he stood at the head of the table, his voice cold and hard. "Jonas is gone. There's no sign of him on deck, no footprints in the snow, nothing. He went out alone after midnight. He broke the rule. This is what happens." Someone started to protest, but the captain cut him off with a glare. "This is not the first time. It will not be the last if you do not listen. The rules are not suggestions. They are the only thing keeping us alive out here. If you cannot follow them, you will not survive." He let the words hang in the air, heavy and final. No one spoke. I looked around at the faces of the crew, fear, anger, disbelief, and something else. A dawning realization that the rules were not just superstition or tradition, but a matter of life and death. That night, I lay in my bunk, unable to sleep. Every creak of the ship, every gust of wind, made me flinch. I kept thinking about Jonas, about how quickly someone could vanish in this place, how the ice could swallow a man without a trace. I remembered the look in the captain's eyes, the way his voice had left no room for argument. My skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold, gnawing fear. I understood now that the rules were all we had, a fragile barrier between us and whatever waited in the darkness. And I wondered, with a chill that went deeper than the Arctic cold, what Jonas had seen in his final moments, and if any of us would be next. After Jonas vanished, the ship changed. The air grew heavier, as if the cold itself had thickened, pressing in from all sides. The crew spoke less, moving through their routines with a haunted, mechanical precision. I caught Malik crossing himself before every shift, and Yuri started carrying a small silver charm on a chain around his neck, rubbing it between his fingers whenever the wind howled. The captain's presence became even more severe, his eyes scanning every face, searching for cracks in our resolve. The fog came on the 7th day, rolling in so thick it swallowed the world beyond the railings. The ship's horns sounded at regular intervals, but the sound was muffled, lost in the endless white. I stood watch on the bridge, peering into the gloom, my breath fogging the glass. Shapes moved in the mist, tall, thin figures that seemed to drift just beyond the reach of the floodlights. Sometimes they looked like people, sometimes like something else entirely, their forms shifting and dissolving when I tried to focus. I told myself it was a trick of the light, exhaustion playing games with my mind, but the fear was real, a cold knot in my stomach that never loosened. The voices started soon after. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard my name, whispered from somewhere out on the ice. Other crew members heard them too, soft, pleading calls, sometimes in the voices of loved ones, sometimes in languages none of us spoke. Anders, still shaken from Jonas's disappearance, claimed he heard his mother calling to him, begging him to come outside. Malik said he heard laughter, high and brittle, echoing from beneath the hull. The rules became more than a list. They were a lifeline, the only thing standing between us and the madness pressing in from the dark. Equipment began to fail. The radio crackled with static, picking up bursts of garbled speech that no one could trace. The engine faltered, forcing Yuri and the engineers to work through the night, their faces drawn and pale in the sickly glow of emergency lights. Doors that had been locked were found swinging open, and more than once, I found myself standing in front of a hatch I knew I'd closed, heart pounding as I remembered the captain's warning. Never close it, just report it. Paranoia spread like frost. The crew eyed each other with suspicion, jumping at every unexpected sound. I felt it too, a growing sense that I was being watched, not just by the others, but by something outside, something patient and hungry. I started to avoid the others, spending more time alone in my cramped cabin, listening to the ship's groans and the distant, unending wind. One night, desperate for a moment of peace, I found myself standing at the threshold of the deck after midnight, the rule echoing in my mind. The fog pressed against the porthole, swirling with shapes that beckoned and retreated. I could hear my sister's voice, clear as day, calling my name from the ice. My hand hovered over the latch, curiosity and longing warring with fear. I wanted to see, to know what was out there, to prove to myself that it was all in my head. But something held me back, a memory of Jonas, the captain's grim face, the rules scrawled in the battered notebook. I stepped away, heart racing, and locked the door behind me. The voices faded, replaced by a silence so deep it rang in my ears. I realized then how close I'd come to breaking the rule, how thin the line was between survival and oblivion. The isolation was complete, and I understood that the greatest danger wasn't just out on the ice. It was inside, waiting for one of us to slip. I couldn't take the silence anymore. The ship felt like a coffin drifting through endless fog, and the rules, once just words, had become a cage. I found the captain alone in his cabin, hunched over a map littered with faded pencil marks and cryptic notes. He didn't look up when I entered, but I could see the exhaustion in the lines of his face, the weight of too many secrets pressing down on his shoulders. "I need to know," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound steady. "What's really out there? Why these rules? Why do we have to live like prisoners on our own ship?" He was silent for a long moment, fingers tracing the edge of the map. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. "You think I want this?" he said quietly. "You think I enjoy watching good men vanish? Or worse, come back changed?" He finally met my eyes, and I saw something there I hadn't expected: fear, raw and unhidden. He gestured for me to sit, then opened a battered logbook, its pages yellowed and stained. "This ship has crossed these waters for decades. My father captained her before me, and his father before him. Every voyage, we lost someone. Sometimes a man would disappear without a trace. Sometimes we'd find him days later, wandering the deck, eyes empty, mouth full of ice. The rules weren't always written down. They were passed by word of mouth, warnings whispered in the dark." He flipped to a page filled with cramped handwriting. "There are things in the Arctic that don't belong to our world. Old things, hungry things. They move in the fog, in the ice, in the lights that dance across the sky. They call to us, where the faces of people we love promise warmth and safety. But if you answer, if you look, if you break the pattern, they find a way in." I shivered, remembering the voices, the shapes in the mist, the way the cold seemed to seep into my thoughts. "What happens if we break the rules?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He closed the logbook, his hands shaking. "You've seen it. Jonas was the latest, but not the first. The rules are the only thing that keeps them at bay. They're not superstitions. They're a bargain, a line in the snow. As long as we follow them, we're left alone, mostly. But the moment we slip, even for a second, they come for us. And they never come empty-handed." He leaned back, eyes distant. "I've buried more men than I care to count. I've seen things that haunt my dreams. I keep the rules because I want to see land again, because I want my crew to go home. But the truth is, out here, we're just guests. The ice doesn't care about us. The things beneath it care even less." I left his cabin with the weight of his words pressing on my chest. The rules were more than orders. They were the only shield we had against a world that was never meant for us. And I realized, with a cold certainty, that survival depended on obedience, not understanding. The storm came without warning, a wall of black clouds rolling over the ice, swallowing the last traces of twilight. The wind howled, shrieking through the rigging, and the temperature plummeted so fast that frost bloomed on every surface. The Aurora's Mercy groaned as the ice closed in, locking us in place with a sound like bones snapping. Snow whipped across the deck, blinding and relentless, and the ship's lights flickered, casting the world into a stuttering nightmare of shadow and glare. I was on watch when the first rule was broken. Anders, still haunted by guilt over Jonas, had gone to check a loose line on the bow just as dusk fell. He was alone, ignoring the rule to stay amidships at dawn and dusk. I saw him through the porthole, a dark figure hunched against the wind, and before I could shout a warning, the snow swallowed him whole. I ran to the bridge, heart pounding, but the captain was already there, face pale and set. "He's gone," he said, voice flat. "We can't help him now." The second rule fell soon after. The storm knocked out the main generator, plunging the lower decks into darkness. Yuri and Malik went below to restart it, but the hatch to the engine room was open, one of the forbidden signs. Malik hesitated, remembering the rule, but Yuri, desperate to restore power, closed it behind them. The moment the latch clicked, the lights flickered violently, and a deep, unnatural cold swept through the ship. I heard Malik scream, a sound that cut through the storm and made my blood run cold. I stumbled down the corridor, flashlight trembling in my hand, and found the hatch frozen shut, rimed with a layer of ice so thick it looked like glass. Through the porthole, I saw Yuri pounding on the door, his breath fogging the glass, eyes wide with terror. Something moved behind him, a shadow, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent the wrong way. Malik was gone, vanished into the darkness, and Yuri's screams faded into silence as the shadow enveloped him. Panic spread through the crew. The radio spat static and voices that weren't ours, whispering in languages I didn't know. Doors slammed open and shut, and the ship itself seemed to twist, corridors stretching and narrowing, leading nowhere. I found myself running in circles, chased by flickering lights and the echo of footsteps that never quite caught up. The rules were unraveling, one by one, and the things outside were coming in. I heard voices calling from the ice, sweet and familiar, promising warmth and safety. My mother's voice, my sister's laughter, all the people I'd left behind. I pressed my hands over my ears, repeating the rules like a prayer, but the voices grew louder, more insistent. I saw crewmen wandering the decks, eyes glazed, mouths moving in silent conversation with things only they could see. Some vanished into the storm, never to return. Others collapsed where they stood, faces frozen in masks of terror. The northern lights appeared, swirling above the ship in colors I'd never seen. Violet, crimson, a sickly green that made my skin crawl. The sky pulsed and writhed, and the air hummed with a low, vibrating sound that set my teeth on edge. I remembered the rule: never look directly at the lights. I kept my eyes down, stumbling through the chaos, but I saw others transfixed, staring upward as their faces twisted in awe and horror. One by one, they dropped to their knees, reaching for the sky, and were lost to the storm. I found the captain on the bridge, clutching the battered notebook, his knuckles white. "We have to hold on," he muttered, voice ragged. "If we can make it to dawn." But the storm showed no sign of breaking, and the things in the ice pressed closer, their shapes flickering at the edge of vision. The ship shuddered, metal groaning, and I felt the deck tilt beneath my feet. A hatch banged open behind me, and a blast of icy wind knocked me to the floor. I looked up and saw a figure standing in the doorway. Jonas, or what was left of him. His eyes were empty, skin pale and stretched tight over his bones, lips moving in a silent plea. Behind him, shadows writhed, reaching for the warmth of the ship. I scrambled back, heart hammering, as the captain shouted for me to run. I fled down the corridor, the rules echoing in my mind. Never go on deck alone after midnight. Never answer voices from the ice. Never look at the lights. I clung to them, repeating them with every step, forcing myself to ignore the whispers, the shapes, the cold that threatened to freeze my thoughts. I found Malik huddled in the galley, eyes wild, clutching a silver charm. Together, we barricaded the door, listening as footsteps passed outside, slow and deliberate. The night stretched on, endless and merciless. The ship groaned and shuddered, and the storm raged, but somehow the rules held. I kept my eyes down, ignored the voices, and refused to open any door, no matter how much it begged. One by one, the horrors faded, retreating as the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon. The storm broke, and the ice loosened its grip, the ship drifting free. When I finally stepped outside, the deck was littered with frost and silence. Half the crew was gone, vanished or changed beyond recognition. The captain stood at the rail, face lined with grief, the notebook clutched to his chest. We had survived, but only just. The rules had saved us, but at a terrible cost. I looked out over the endless ice, heart heavy, and wondered how many more would be lost before the journey's end. Dawn came slowly and gray, the kind of light that barely touched the world, as if the sun itself was reluctant to look upon what remained. The storm had passed, leaving the Aurora's Mercy battered and scarred, her deck slick with frost and silence. I moved through the ship in a daze, every step echoing in the emptiness. Malik was in the galley, staring into a mug of cold coffee, his hands trembling. The captain stood alone on the bridge, eyes fixed on the horizon, the battered notebook resting on the console beside him. Of the crew, only a handful remained, their faces hollowed by fear and exhaustion. We gathered in the mess hall, the survivors drawn together by instinct more than choice. No one spoke of the night before. There were no words for what we'd seen, no comfort to be found in shared misery. We counted heads, and the absences were a wound that would never heal. Anders, Yuri, Jonas, gone, along with half a dozen others. Some had vanished without a trace. Others left behind only the memory of their screams. The rules had saved us, but not all of us, and not without a price. The captain addressed us, his voice rough and quiet. "We'll make for the nearest port. The ship's damaged, but she'll hold. We keep to the rules until we're safe. No exceptions." He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze lingering on me. "You did well," he said, softer now. "You remembered what mattered." I wanted to ask him what came next, what we were supposed to do with the memories that would never fade, but he only shook his head. As the others drifted away, I lingered, watching him close the notebook and slip it into his coat. He hesitated, then spoke so only I could hear. "There's one more rule," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's not written down. It's the one you carry with you when you leave this place." I waited, heart pounding, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he turned away, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that the rules weren't just for the ship or the ice. They were for us, for the parts of ourselves that survived when others didn't. The last rule was the hardest. Never forget. Never let yourself believe it was just a nightmare, or that the world is as safe as it seems. The things in the ice are patient. They remember, and they wait for those who let their guard down. The Aurora's Mercy limped south, engines straining, the ice closing behind us like a door. I stood at the rail, watching the horizon blur into mist, the cold biting at my skin. I knew I would never be the same. The rules were etched into my bones now, a litany I would carry for the rest of my life. I wondered how many others had left these waters with the same scars, how many had tried to warn those who came after. As the ship crept toward safety, I caught a glimpse of movement on the ice, a shadow, tall and thin, watching us go. I looked away, repeating the rules under my breath, and felt the captain's final warning settle in my chest like a stone. The cycle would continue. There would always be another ship, another crew, another desperate soul who thought they could survive the Arctic by luck or strength alone. But only those who remembered the rules would have a chance. And even then, The ice never truly let you go.